What if I told you using reverse osmosis water and distilled water for your orchids could be depriving them of nutrients? What if I also told you that by using them, you could be providing an environment that is more susceptible to fungal growth? And what if I told you that at 16 degrees and I'm talking to you wearing just a t-shirt, would you take me seriously? No. So let's get that remedy first. There we go, a lot more comfortable in this weather. Now let's first of all have a look at what reverse osmosis water and distilled water are before we look at how they're going to affect your plant. Because I'm such a scatterbrain, Ed always posts up everything in a nice neat article in that Buy Me a Coffee link that he puts in the description down below. Be sure to check that out if I'm diluting the topic too far. She agrees. Firstly, reverse osmosis water is water that has been pushed under pressure through a membrane that has got very tiny holes in it. And this pushes just purely that pure water through those tiny little holes, leaving the majority of the dissolved solids on the other side, so you'll end up with an almost pure water. Distilled water, on the other hand, is done through evaporation. You boil the water, and all that steam that comes up is then recondensed to form the pure water. This has absolutely no dissolved solids in it. So distilled water has less dissolved solids or minerals in it than what reverse osmosis water does, but they're both considered to have almost zero. And how is that going to affect your plant? Surely pure water is exactly what they're looking for, and what could be better for them? Firstly, let's have a look at the roots of the orchid and see how they absorb those nutrients to ensure the healthy growth of the plant. What happens with dissolved salts is they generally move from an environment of a higher concentration and they diffuse to an environment of a lower concentration. This is just the natural way that they help balance out. And how is this then going to affect your orchids? So your orchids will then be able to absorb all those good nutrients that you are feeding it when you have added that extra fertilizer into the water that you are feeding your orchids. And then the concentration of salts is going to be higher in the media, and the orchid will then be able to absorb or diffuse those nutrients into the root itself. As the orchid transports those nutrients around it and uses it, the roots can then absorb more. And then what happens at those points when there's a lower salt concentration in the media as opposed to in the roots? The roots themselves have an osmotic pressure, which helps reduce the diffusion of those salts and ions back out of the roots and into the media. So that osmotic pressure helps maintain the higher salt content inside the roots so that the plant can then use them. But what happens then when you're adding water that has absolutely no salt content in it whatsoever? You are reducing the salts and the ions in the media to a point the osmotic pressure is no longer able to maintain the higher concentrations of salts in the roots as opposed to what is in the media. So the media is going to be drawing those salts and ions out of your plant, taking away that nutrition that it needs. So you're actually drawing those nutrients out of the plant itself. And what's going to happen with this, as you remove your orchid from the water or as the water's pouring through, it's taking those nutrients away and flushing them out of your plot altogether. So the more frequently you are watering with this distilled or reverse osmosis water, the more nutrients you are taking from your plant. So this can be very beneficial, especially when you're trying to flush your plant after overfeeding, when you've landed up with that white crystalline structure on your media and want to get rid of the excess salts in the media. Reverse osmosis and distilled water is going to be excellent to do that. Because these waters with almost zero dissolved solids in them allow for faster and easier dissolving of salts and ions into it. This will help flush away those excesses more easily. And the problem here often comes in with those beginner growers where they've learnt to water once a week by soaking for 5 or 10 minutes in water and then letting it drain out, and then only feeding once a month. So what you're really doing here is every time you're watering, you're allowing it to stand in that water that has little to no salt values, allowing it to draw out all the goodness from the plant and the media, and then you're trying to play catch up by feeding it only once a month. All you're doing is make it more and more difficult for your orchid to survive. And then also by using this reverse osmosis and distilled water, you've got to be extremely careful about what you're adding to your water when you're feeding your plants, because they have no buffering capacity at all. So whatever you're adding to them are going to give it the wild swings in pH. So you can either make it extremely acidic or very alkaline, depending on what you're adding to your water. Water with some dissolved solids generally have a buffering capacity to it that helps manage the pH so that it's less likely to swing that wildly in either direction. So always be sure of what you're adding to your water. So have a pH meter handy to be able to test your water when adding nutrients or anything else to your water. Because these wild swings in the pH, if it's too acidic or too alkaline, are also going to cause problems with your orchid. It's going to reduce their ability to absorb any of those nutrients that you are trying to feed it. So we really need to keep our pH at that 5.5, 6 level, just to ensure that our orchid has the best chance of absorbing as many of those nutrients as possible. So how do we rectify this? Some reverse osmosis filters have remineralization parts to them, which will then supply minerals back into your water. So invariably, depending on the setup, you'll be able to get between 7 and 30 parts per million added back into your water after filtering. These are generally in the form of calcium, magnesium, and potassium. That's what the remineralization generally provides. And when comparing that with rainwater, generally rainwater is going to provide you with around 20 to 30 parts per million. Of course, that's all depending on the environment you're in. In more industrialized area or higher development areas, you may land up with slightly more. But generally, you're going to land up with those 20 to 30 parts per million, and that's going to provide you also with extra nitrogen and phosphorus, along with the calcium, magnesium, and potassium. So all of these nutrients are essential for your plant's growth, but all of this is going to help reduce the diffusion pressure and allow that osmotic pressure to be enough to hold those nutrients inside the roots of your plants. So what if we're buying our distilled or reverse osmosis water? How do we then remedy this situation? It can be done quite easily by remineralizing yourself. And by that, we're saying we're going to be adding very small amounts of your fertilizers into your water. So to get parts per million, we can actually use milligrams per liter, and that's going to basically be a 1-for-1 conversion. So if we're wanting to add in 30 parts per million, especially if we've got distilled water, then we're going to need 30 milligrams per liter of our fertilizer to add into it. So basically, that's just going to be one very small pinch that we're going to be adding, because remember, a teaspoon is going to be approximately 5 grams. A milligram is 1,000th of a gram. So 1,000 milligrams equals 1 gram. So you can see how small amount it is really going to be. We don't have to be completely accurate with this. We can be as close as possible, because even up to about 50 parts per million is still going to be perfectly fine for your orchids. In fact, it's still considered good, clean water. And you can even use water that has got 50 parts per million to flush your plants, because it's still clean enough to be able to dissolve away those excess salts in the media for a good flushing. Of course, if you do have severely overfed orchids with really bad crystals on top, if you're not repotting it or you don't want to repot it, or it's in a media that it can keep growing in and you really need to flush it, then using pure distilled or reverse osmosis water is going to be ideal to help give it that once a month or occasional flushing that your orchid will invariably need. So if your water is too hard in your taps and you need to use reverse osmosis or distilled water because you don't have rainwater available, then remember just to remineralize that water just partially or just enough. Give it that 30 to 50 parts per million just to ensure you're not causing any damage to your orchids, because the removal of those nutrients is going to cause lack of vigor in your plant. It's going to slow down the whole growth of the plant. It could even cause nutrient deficiencies in your plant itself. Also, by the removal of all those salts completely, especially from the media, it's going to cause a whole environment in and around your plant that is going to be more susceptible to that fungal growth, and then you'll start getting fungal problems in your orchid as well. And then with the less vigor in your plant is less able to fight off any fungal infections. So you really are making it more difficult for your plant to survive. So it's always good to remember, if you're using reverse osmosis or distilled water, TDS meters, total dissolved solid meters, and pH meters can be your best friends. And if you have any further queries on this, please drop your comments in the comments box below. We'd love to hear whether you are using reverse osmosis or distilled water and how you go about using it. And thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.